On a random Tuesday in August 2024, Megabus sent its customers a text message. Their bus no longer existed. No warning, no press conference, just gone. If you grew up in America, there's a good chance you remember those blue buses, the company that made a $1 ticket feel almost too good to be true. For years, Megabus carried over 60 million passengers across hundreds of cities. Students, families, tourists. If you needed to travel cheap, you knew Megabus. Here's what should worry you about that. This wasn't a startup that ran out of runway. This wasn't some fly-by-night operation that was always going to fail. At its peak, Megabus was growing faster than any airline in America, faster than Amtrak, faster than almost any transportation company in modern history. So if a company that dominant, that fast-growing, that too big to fail, can just stop showing up one day, what does that say about every other business you've assumed is permanent? It wasn't one bad decision. It wasn't a single scandal. Megabus was slowly buried under $198 million in debt it never chose to carry. Years before anyone even noticed the walls were caving in. Nobody rang the alarm. And by the time anyone did, it was already too late. Stay with this one till the end, because I'm going to show you exactly who loaded that debt onto Megabus, why nobody stopped it in time, and the real culprit behind its collapse that almost nobody's talking about. It started in the UK back in 2003 under a company called Stagecoach Group, a British transport operator with a reckless idea. Inner-city bus travel that didn't need terminals, didn't need overhead, and didn't need to cost more than a coffee. Just curbside pickup and a price that started at $1 and climbed as seats filled. By 2006, Stagecoach brought the model to the United States, and it landed at exactly the right moment. No ticket counters, no corporate feel. Just a blue double-decker bus waiting curbside at a price that felt like a glitch in the system. It worked at a scale most companies never reach. Within a decade, over 500 cities, more than 50 million passengers. It looked untouchable. If that sounds familiar, it's because I covered almost the exact same pattern, a brand that looked untouchable right before it wasn't, in my video on the collapse of 7-Eleven. Different industry, eerily similar warning signs. I'll drop that one on screen if you want to check it after this. But the same thing that made Megabus feel unstoppable, its size, its footprint, its brand, was about to make it an extremely attractive target. Not to a competitor, to a buyer. What that buyer did to this company next is the reason it doesn't exist today. In 2019, a private equity firm out of LA called Variant Equity Advisors bought Coach USA, the parent company behind Megabus, for $271 million. On paper, it looked like a normal business deal. But underneath, something else was going on, something that's become pretty common in private equity buyouts these days. The deal was paid for with debt. And here's the catch, that debt didn't stick with the buyer. It got stuck on the company instead. So if Megabus ever fell behind on paying it off, that wasn't Variant's problem. It was Megabus's problem now. In other words, Megabus didn't just get bought. It got left holding the bag for its own purchase. And the timing? About as bad as it could possibly get. Because just 1 year later, the entire business Megabus depended on, people traveling, hopping on buses, moving from city to city, came to a screeching halt. Now listen carefully, because what happened next is the moment this company's fate was pretty much sealed. In 2020, ridership on Coach USA's buses fell by 90%. Not a slowdown, a near total stop. And for a company already carrying hundreds of millions in acquisition debt, that wasn't a rough year. That was the year the math stopped working. Most of the industry eventually bounced back. By 2023, inner-city bus ridership across the US had climbed to around 85 to 90% of pre-pandemic levels. Megabus's parent company had only recovered to 45%, less than half. And while Coach USA was still digging itself out of a hole, a new competitor was creeping in. FlixBus, a German company that had already snapped up Megabus's old operations in Europe, was now pushing hard into American routes. Here's the kicker. FlixBus barely owned any buses. It just ran the app and the brand, while local operators covered the actual costs. That meant it could undercut Megabus on price and barely feel it. The debt hadn't gone anywhere. The passengers hadn't come back. And now, there was a hungrier, leaner rival standing exactly where Megabus used to stand alone. Coach USA was out of time, out of cash, and about to run out of options completely. What happened next is where this whole thing finally breaks. On June 11, 2024, Coach USA filed for Chapter 11 bankruptcy. The number behind it, $197.8 million in debt, $37 million of that a pandemic relief loan the company still hadn't paid off, the rest owed to lenders, vendors, and creditors who'd been waiting years to get paid. 2 months later, Megabus abruptly cut routes nationwide. In Texas, a service that had run for over a decade, connecting Austin, Dallas, Houston, San Antonio, just stopped. No transition period. No warning to riders standing at the curb expecting a bus that wasn't coming. Some of those folks were headed to job interviews. Some were headed to see family they hadn't seen in years. Didn't matter. There was no bus coming, and there wasn't going to be one. The brand didn't fully disappear. Pieces of it were sold off, split between 2 buyers, stripped down, and repackaged. But the Megabus that carried 50 million people to 500 cities was already gone. It just took a few more months for everyone else to notice. And here's the thing, Megabus isn't really the story. It's just the example. What actually killed it is happening to companies you use right now, and by the end of this, you'll probably never look at cheap and reliable the same way again. Here's the part that should actually worry you. Megabus didn't die because people stopped needing cheap travel. It died because someone else's debt got handed to the business, and nobody stress tested what would happen if the good years ever stopped. If you run a company, any size, ask yourself the question nobody at Megabus asked in time. What happens to this business on its worst year, not its best one? Because here's the bigger pattern underneath all of it. When a company like this collapses, it's never the people who structured the deal who feel it first. It's the driver who loses a route. It's the rider stuck at the curb. The risk gets loaded onto the business, but the fallout gets loaded onto everyone downstream of it. The businesses that survive aren't the ones that never take on risk. They're the ones that know exactly how much they're carrying before the year comes that makes them find out the hard way. If this one hit different, hit that like button. It actually helps get stories like this in front of more people. If you've ever wondered what would happen to your own business on its worst year, not its best one, tell me in the comments. I read every one, and honestly, that's usually where the next story on this channel comes from. And if you want more of these, hit subscribe. I break down companies that looked untouchable right up until they weren't.